The CEO's daughter fired me, calling my project bad code. I let the whole billing system collapse. I sat by the rain-streaked window of Rosie's Diner across from TechFlow's gleaming headquarters in downtown Seattle, my hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of peppermint tea. Outside, the autumn drizzle painted streaks down the glass facade of the 40-story tower, while news vans clustered at the entrance like vultures sensing death. I watched employees stumble out with hollow expressions, clutching their belongings, phones pressed desperately to their ears. The building that had been my second home for 14 years now looked like a monument to failure. My phone buzzed against the checkered tablecloth. The email subject line flashed in angry red. Critical system failure. All operations suspended. For a moment, I just stared at those words, letting them sink in like stones dropped into still water. My chest didn't tighten with shock. It expanded with the cold satisfaction of inevitability. I had known this day was coming the moment security escorted me out 7 weeks ago. 7 weeks earlier, I'd stood in that sterile conference room on the 35th floor, a cardboard box of my life waiting by the door. Across from me sat Brianna Caldwell, the CEO's 26-year-old daughter. Her blonde hair pulled back in a power bun that screamed, "Daddy's money." She wore a smirk like expensive perfume, overwhelming and impossible to ignore. "JarDnolita," she said, leaning back in the chair her father's empire had bought her. "We've reviewed your payment processing modules. Honestly, this spaghetti code is holding us back. It's time to embrace the future." Spaghetti code. That was her summary of 14 years of work. Countless midnight hours perfecting the transaction reconciliation system that quietly processed millions in payments across 12 different platforms. My team had built the invisible backbone that kept TechFlow's clients happy, money moving seamlessly between mobile apps, web portals, and legacy banking systems without a single critical failure. But to Brianna, it was just outdated clutter blocking her vision of a revolutionary fintech experience. I remembered gripping the edge of that conference table, forcing my voice to stay level as HR slid the severance papers toward me. "This system handles transactions for over 2 million users across different payment processors," I'd said quietly. "Each one has different validation rules, different fraud detection protocols. That complexity isn't inefficiency, it's survival." She'd laughed, actually laughed, and waved her manicured hand dismissively. "JarDnolita, if it can't be explained in a PowerPoint slide, it's bad code. We're moving to a clean microservices architecture. Everything automated, everything scalable." I signed those papers in silence, knowing that words were wasted on someone who'd never watched a real system break under pressure. As the elevator carried me down to the lobby for the last time, I whispered to myself, "They just unplugged their life support system." Now, sitting in Rosie's Diner with my tea growing cold, I closed that email and took another sip. The sirens outside mixed with a distant hum of Seattle traffic, the city moving forward, unaware of the digital catastrophe unfolding behind that glass facade. I leaned back in the worn vinyl booth, watching the first cracks appear in Brianna's empire, and remembered the moment she'd smiled at me across that polished table. Little did she know, the real earthquake was only beginning. The memory of that all-hands meeting burned in my mind as clearly as the Space Needle piercing Seattle's gray sky. We'd gathered in the glass-walled conference room on the 28th floor, the engineering team arranged in a nervous semicircle around the mahogany table. Most of us had weathered multiple tech booms and busts here. Some had gone gray debugging code in these halls. We were the quiet machinery behind millions of dollars flowing through TechFlow's payment ecosystem. And there stood Brianna Caldwell, designer blazer crisp as her confident grin, wielding her tablet like a royal scepter. "TechFlow is entering a new era," she declared, her voice bouncing off the floor-to-ceiling windows. A slide materialized on the wall. 60-day digital transformation initiative. Neon green arrows promised exponential growth. Flowcharts of pristine microservices bloomed like digital flowers. She clicked through her buzzword symphony. AI-driven architecture, containerized deployments, blockchain-enabled transactions. Her voice rose with each technical term, like a preacher building to crescendo. Then came the bombshell. To accelerate this modernization, she paused for dramatic effect, I've partnered with Code Genius AI. Their revolutionary platform will automatically refactor our legacy systems, eliminating the technical debt that's been dragging us down. A few junior developers actually applauded. I raised my hand slowly. Brianna, our payment processing system isn't just code, it's institutional knowledge. We handle everything from Apple Pay to ancient bank ACH transfers. Some clients still use Internet Explorer 9. Others require OAuth 2.0 with custom encryption. One misconfiguration can freeze millions in transactions or trigger fraud alerts that take weeks to resolve. She tilted her head, that patronizing smile spreading across her face like oil on water. JarDnolita, complexity for complexity's sake is just poor engineering. The future doesn't have room for band-aid solutions and duct tape fixes. Around the table, veteran engineers shifted uncomfortably, but nobody spoke up. The weight of her last name pressed down on the room like a closing trap. I lowered my hand and sat back, watching those neon arrows flash past, each one another nail in a coffin she couldn't see. Our new system will be elegant, scalable, and maintainable, she continued, clicking to a slide showing a sleek dashboard. Clean code that any developer can understand at a glance. I wanted to tell her about the 3-day outage at Payment Corp when their elegant system couldn't handle leap year calculations. Or the startup that lost half their customers when their scalable architecture crashed during Black Friday because nobody had tested it with real transaction volumes. But I knew she'd dismiss those stories as irrelevant fear-mongering. By the time she finished her presentation, I could already see the countdown timer ticking in my head. The system we'd built wasn't beautiful. It was scarred by reality, patched by experience, and reinforced by hard-earned wisdom. It worked because it had survived everything the financial world could throw at it. But Brianna saw only its weathered exterior, not its unbreakable core. As the meeting ended and engineers filed out in worried whispers, I stayed in my seat, watching the Seattle skyline through those pristine windows. Somewhere in the distance, a freight train's horn echoed off the buildings, a sound that reminded me that some things, no matter how old or unglamorous, still carried the heavy loads that kept the world moving. The countdown to disaster had officially begun. The office hummed with its usual evening energy, the soft whir of workstations, the distant ping of message notifications, and the ever-present hum of Seattle traffic 35 floors below. The city sparkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a reminder that while my career here was ending, life outside these walls continued its relentless march forward. HR had delivered the news with clinical efficiency. Margaret from Human Resources slid a manila folder across the polished table like she was serving divorce papers. 6-month severance, continued health benefits through December, and the standard non-disclosure agreement. I scanned the paperwork without emotion. The words blurred together, position eliminated, company restructuring, mutual agreement. Corporate poetry that meant one thing. Brianna wanted me gone, and her father's signature made it law. Any questions? Margaret asked, her voice carrying the practiced sympathy of someone who'd delivered this speech dozens of times. I shook my head and signed on the designated lines. Words wouldn't change the outcome. The Caldwell name had already decided my fate. Back at my desk, I opened drawers that had housed my professional life. A faded photo from our first team barbecue at Golden Gardens Beach. A coffee mug with a chip from the night we debugged the Christmas Eve payment crisis. 14 years of late nights and small victories reduced to a cardboard box that felt impossibly light. Before logging out for the final time, I opened my personal documentation folder. Not company property, just my own detailed notes. Flowcharts of the payment reconciliation engine. Explanations of every edge case and workaround. Comments describing the delicate balance between different payment processors. It was the roadmap through a minefield that only I could read. Quietly, I copied everything to an encrypted thumb drive and deleted the originals from the shared network. I wasn't planning revenge. I was simply ensuring my hard-earned knowledge didn't become another casualty of corporate amnesia. On my way to the elevator, I paused by the server room. Behind that locked door, my code was still running, processing thousands of transactions every hour, moving money between checking accounts and credit cards without missing a beat. I pressed my palm against the cool metal handle and whispered, "They have no idea what they just disconnected." The elevator descended through floors of bustling activity. Developers debugging late-night issues, product managers reviewing analytics dashboards, customer service reps handling client calls. None of them knew that the foundation of their work had just walked out the door. I emerged into the lobby carrying my small box of memories, stepping into the crisp October air. Seattle's evening crowd flowed around me. Tech workers heading to happy hour, commuters catching buses, street musicians setting up for the dinner rush. The city pulsed with its usual energy, completely unaware of the digital time bomb ticking away in the tower behind me. As I walked toward the parking garage, I pulled out my phone and opened my calendar app. I marked today's date with a simple note. Day 0. Then I started counting forward, wondering how long it would take for the cracks to show. I loaded my box into the trunk of my Honda Civic and drove home through the familiar streets of Queen and, past coffee shops and bookstores, past the lives and routines that would continue unchanged while TechFlow's world quietly crumbled from within. The real test was about to begin. 23 days after I walked out of TechFlow for the last time, I found myself strolling through Pike Place Market on a crisp November morning. The air carried the mingled scents of fresh salmon, brewing coffee, and the salt breeze from Elliott Bay. I clutched a paper cup of hot chocolate from the original Starbucks, letting the warmth seep through my gloves as I wandered past flower stalls and buskers. My phone buzzed with a Reddit notification. Force of habit made me open the app, and there it was, a thread exploding in r/mildly infuriating. TechFlow charged me 1 cent for a $299 software license. The screenshot showed a pristine invoice with a single penny listed in the total field. The comments section was already going nuclear. "Lucky you," replied another user. "They just billed my company $47,000 for our $150 monthly subscription. Our accounting department is losing their minds." Same here. $12,000 charge for a $50 premium account. Customer service keeps saying, "We're looking into it." I scrolled deeper, finding the chaos spreading across Twitter, LinkedIn, and tech forums. Screenshots of impossible invoices. Angry executives threatening lawsuits. Memes featuring burning dollar signs and confused Pikachu faces. Some users joked about accidentally discovering a money printing glitch. Others were calling lawyers. I took a slow sip of hot chocolate, savoring both the sweetness and the bitter irony. This wasn't joy I felt, more like watching gravity finally catch up with a falling object. The logic was painfully simple. My payment reconciliation system had been the invisible translator between 12 different payment processors. Some handled cents as integers like Stripe, others as floats with 2 decimal places like PayPal, and legacy banking systems that treated everything as strings with custom formatting rules. The system parsed transaction amounts, normalized them across platforms, and ensured every penny landed in the right account. It was ugly code because the financial world itself was ugly, a patchwork of competing standards, regulatory requirements, and historical accidents that somehow had to work together seamlessly. But Brianna's gleaming microservices didn't understand any of that context. They were probably misreading decimal points, dropping currency symbols, and treating cent amounts as dollar values. A $299 transaction might be parsed as 299 cents and converted to $2.99, or the decimal point might be ignored entirely, turning $150 into $15,000. The beautiful part, or terrifying depending on your perspective, was that I hadn't touched anything. I hadn't planted backdoors, written malicious code, or sabotaged anything. All I'd done was leave and take my knowledge with me. Arrogance had done the rest. A seagull landed on the railing beside me, eyeing my hot chocolate hopefully. Somewhere across the city, phone lines were melting from angry customer calls. Emergency meetings were being scheduled. And I knew the first desperate plea for help would come soon. I pulled out my phone and opened my calendar. I added another simple note. Day 23, the dam breaks. Then I finished my hot chocolate and continued my leisurely walk through the market, listening to the cheerful chaos of vendors hawking their wares while a digital disaster bloomed in the background. The real storm was just beginning. 4 days later, I was walking through downtown Bellevue, past the gleaming corporate campuses of Microsoft and Amazon, when the electronic billboards caught my eye. Between ads for the latest iPhone and Black Friday sales, one headline pulsed in urgent red. TechFlow stock crashes 52%, billing crisis continues. Below it, financial news channels scrolled their breaking coverage. Major clients abandon TechFlow platform. Class action lawsuits filed over billing errors. CEO Harrison Caldwell to address shareholders Monday. I paused on the sidewalk, letting the evening commute flow around me like water around a stone. The company I'd poured 14 years into was imploding faster than I'd imagined possible. The elegant, invisible engine I'd built to keep their world spinning had been replaced with shiny promises and algorithmic guesswork. That night, I opened my laptop and checked LinkedIn, a platform I'd barely touched since leaving. My inbox overflowed with messages. Recruiters sensing opportunity, former colleagues reaching out, and a few familiar names that made me pause. One message stood out. From Casey Martinez, a bright junior developer who'd nodded politely during Brianna's transformation presentation. JarDnolita, we broke everything. The new system is charging random amounts and every fix creates 3 new problems. Payment disputes are backing up for weeks. Major clients are threatening to leave. I keep thinking about what you said in that meeting about institutional knowledge. I wish we'd listened. I stared at the blinking cursor, then closed the laptop without responding. Reality was teaching her lessons that no amount of explanation could have conveyed 7 weeks ago. My phone lit up with news alerts. TechFlow loses 3 enterprise clients in single day. Stock continues plummet as billing issues persist. Shareholders demand answers from Caldwell leadership. I poured myself a glass of wine and settled by my living room window, watching the lights of downtown Seattle twinkle across the water. The weight in my chest wasn't guilt. It was the strange lightness that comes from being proven right in the most expensive way possible. My phone rang. Unknown number, but I knew exactly who it would be. JarDnolita Chambers, I answered. A pause, then a voice I recognized. Harrison Caldwell himself. The exhaustion in his voice was audible even through the phone's tinny speaker. JarDnolita, we need your help. Name your terms. I let the silence stretch, watching a ferry glide across Elliott Bay like a ghost ship. 10 times my previous salary, I said finally. Paid monthly in advance. Full control of the fix with 0 interference from management. No hesitation. Done. One more condition, I continued. Brianna doesn't set foot in any technical meeting. She doesn't review my code, doesn't approve my decisions, doesn't even send me emails. This is non-negotiable. The silence was longer this time. I could almost hear him calculating the cost of his daughter's pride against the hemorrhaging stock price. I'll handle it, he said quietly. And any system I rebuild remains my intellectual property. TechFlow gets a license to use it, but I own the code. That's unusual. So is losing half your market value in 3 weeks because someone deleted the system that kept you alive. Send me the contract tonight. I'll walk into that building tomorrow, but I won't write a single line of code until it's signed. The line went quiet then. Whatever it takes to stop this nightmare. I hung up and smiled at my reflection in the dark window. Tomorrow, I'd return to that tower on entirely different terms. The next morning I walked through TechFlow's revolving doors like I owned the place, because in a way I now did. Security nodded respectfully, already briefed on my new status. The elevator ride to the 28th floor felt different this time. The building's confident hum had been replaced by an undercurrent of barely controlled panic. The engineering floor looked like a war zone. Conference rooms had been converted into round-the-clock command centers. Pizza boxes and energy drink cans littered every surface. The air hung thick with stale coffee and the particular brand of exhaustion that comes from fighting fires you can't put out. A cluster of hollow-eyed engineers looked up as I entered the main workspace. Casey Martinez stood among them, her face drawn and pale. She gave me a small nod that carried the weight of hard-learned humility. "This is why the old system worked," I began without preamble, pulling up a diagram on the main display. No pleasantries, no small talk. We had a company to save. 12 payment processors, each with different data formats, validation rules, and error handling protocols. Some send amounts as integers in cents, others as floats in dollars. Legacy bank systems that still use fixed-width text files. Mobile payment apps that bundle metadata in JSON. And tax jurisdictions that change their requirements quarterly. As I spoke, engineers grabbed notebooks and leaned closer. I walked them through the architecture. How a PayPal transaction for $149.99 had to be normalized differently than a Stripe payment for the same amount. How currency exchange rates needed to be locked at the moment of transaction, not at settlement. How fraud detection algorithms from different processors could trigger false positives if they weren't carefully orchestrated. None of this is elegant, I continued, sketching interconnections on the whiteboard. That's why the code looked messy. It was battle-tested by reality, scarred by edge cases, and hardened by millions of real transactions. Clean code is a luxury we couldn't afford when people's money was on the line. Casey's eyes met mine, and I saw understanding dawn in them, shame mixed with relief. She was finally seeing that messy had always meant tested by fire. I spent the next 6 hours rebuilding the payment reconciliation engine from scratch. My fingers moved with practiced precision, writing functions to handle decimal normalization, transaction state management, and those maddening edge cases that no AI tool could predict. Behind me, engineers watched like students observing surgery, as I annotated every decision with detailed comments. "This block handles Apple Pay transactions from international cards," I explained, pointing to a nested conditional statement. "Without it, a €100 payment could become $10,000 or $1 depending on how the receiving bank interprets the currency code." 4 hours later, I pushed the first test build to our staging environment. "Run the full transaction suite," I instructed. The room held its collective breath as Casey initiated the test batch. One by one, results appeared on the monitor. Perfect amounts, correct fees, proper currency handling across all 12 processors. "It works," she whispered, then louder. "It actually works." The room erupted in exhausted cheers. Engineers clapping, high-fiving, some actually crying with relief. They'd been drowning for weeks, and someone had finally thrown them a life preserver. I simply nodded, saving my code to the private repository that my contract guaranteed I would control. Relief was for people who hadn't seen this disaster coming from miles away. The room fell silent when the door opened. Harrison Caldwell stepped in. His silver hair impeccably styled but his face carrying the weight of 3 weeks in corporate hell. His eyes swept the team of exhausted engineers before landing on me with something that might have been respect. "Miss Chambers," he said, voice low but firm. "A word, please." Privately. I saved my work, logged out of the terminal, and followed him to a glass-walled conference room overlooking Elliott Bay. The Seattle skyline stretched out before us, a reminder that the world kept turning even when your empire was crumbling. Harrison closed the door and stood for a moment, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the water like he was searching for words among the whitecaps. "Richard briefed me," he said finally, "about the outage, about your decisive intervention, and about the terms you negotiated." I leaned against the conference table, letting the silence stretch between us like a bridge he'd have to cross. "My daughter," he continued, each word carefully measured, "made a catastrophic error in judgment. She dismantled critical systems without understanding their purpose. I gave her too much autonomy, too much trust." He inhaled slowly. "I want to offer you a permanent position. Senior Vice President of Engineering. Full authority over technical architecture and appropriate compensation to match." It would have been easy to say yes. For 14 years I'd lived and breathed in these hallways, protecting systems that no one understood but everyone depended on. But the memory of Brianna's smirk in that all-hands meeting still burned fresh, along with the polite efficiency of my termination. "I'm not coming back as an employee," I said quietly. His eyebrows drew together. "You've proven your value beyond question. Why refuse?" "Because the problem here isn't just bad code," I replied, meeting his gaze. "It's a culture that values presentation over performance, that hands power to family connections instead of expertise, and that throws away the people holding everything together because their work isn't pretty enough for PowerPoint." Harrison's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. The stock price over the past 3 weeks had made my point more eloquently than any speech could. I pushed away from the table and walked to the window, watching a ferry cut through the gray water. Next time someone wants to modernize a critical system, ask them to explain exactly what they're replacing and why. Don't just trust the buzzwords. The words hung in the air between us like a verdict. He nodded slowly, the gesture carrying the weight of expensive lessons learned. "Brianna will be transitioning to business development, effective immediately. She'll have no technical authority whatsoever." I felt no triumph, just the quiet satisfaction of natural consequences finally catching up to poor decisions. My work had spoken louder than any argument I could have made. As I gathered my things to leave, the engineering team looked up from their workstations. Casey caught my eye and mouthed, "Thank you," her expression carrying a mix of gratitude and hard-earned wisdom. I walked to the elevator with my head high, knowing I was leaving this building on my own terms. The doors opened, and as I stepped inside, I could see the city stretching out before me, full of companies that needed someone who understood that the most important code is often the ugliest, and that experience can't be automated away. The real victory wasn't in the money or the vindication. It was in walking away richer, freer, and with my value finally acknowledged. I'd turned years of invisible work into leverage, and for the first time in my career, I'd chosen myself. Some code looks messy. Some people seem invisible. But they're the ones holding the world together, until someone decides to learn that lesson the hard way.